I'm Charlotte McLeod with investingnews.com, and here today with me is Mike Campbell. He's one of our best known financial analysts here in Canada, and he's also the host of the popular Money Talks program. Thank you so much for being here. Great to have you.
Nice to be here. Love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, I think we're going to go in a lot of interesting directions today. We're here to talk about your upcoming World Financial Outlook Conference that will be held next month, February, here in Vancouver. But before we go there, just because it's our first time talking, I thought you could start by giving me a brief overview of yourself and your background. I think many people will be familiar with you, but just for anybody who isn't aware.
Well, I'm old, as you can see. I've been doing, finances. I started in New York at Merrill Lynch, for example. And I hate to even say this. I mean, I'm talking literally 45 years ago. I need a doctor's help now to get past even saying that. But yeah, I worked in the financial business for a number of years. At the same time, I was doing some lecturing out at UBC. Always been fascinated with this stuff. I've been doing television work for, if I do the math, it's about 40 years, and radio shows. And Money Talks has been around for decades. And I'm very pleased to say we've been fortunate to have the support of, large audiences every time. So, yeah, it's just a background. Over the course of those years, I've got to meet and know so many fine analysts, which I've benefited from. I hope the audience has too. But my background also academically is in, finance, into economics, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, really good to have you here today. And as I mentioned, many directions for us to go in, starting with the World Outlook Financial Conference. So I mentioned that is coming up very soon. And you have a number of speakers, companies that I think people in our audience will be quite familiar with. I wanted to begin by asking you about your goals with this conference. What are you hoping to achieve for attendees?
Well, what I'm hoping, and it's the same with Money Talks, is I think we're in an incredibly historic changing environment. And now you may measure it by saying, man, look at those interest rates, the way they drop down and then they rocketed back up. You've seen it in certain pricings and the volatility within all of that. That's part of the environment we're dealing with. And I think people need a lot of help in protecting themselves. I mean, where are they going to get it? They're not getting it in high school. They're not going to get it in university unless you take a course specific. And people become, I always say, you don't want to become roadkill here. But many people are. We know that from the renewal of the mortgage problem that we're seeing in the country. We know that from how many people are having trouble make just the basics ends meet. I mean, we looked at something from the Financial Institution of Canada say that 43% of Canadians under 44 borrow money for basic necessities. We know that 2 million people access food banks every month in Canada. I mean, it isn't a case any longer. It doesn't matter that our politicians don't acknowledge this, but it used to be we worried about the bottom 20% of income earners. That number's up to 50, 55%. And more than that have been impacted to a degree that they've had to change their lifestyle. But I'm talking about people literally sitting there worried about how to make ends meet. So I look at that stuff and say, well, how can I help you? How can we, and that sounds a bit pompous, but I mean, we can. If you bring in right analysts, you direct them, especially inform them about what's really going on. And they have to first notice that things are not the same. I mean, we are in a period of historic change. Now, I'll say, Charlotte, the other thing I do is I look globally. I don't just look at, we've learned that slowly. For example, if you're out in Vancouver where you are, we started to appreciate that it was international money coming in to the city that was pushing real estate. We started to realize so policies in China actually had an impact on my housing cost. We know that in so many others. Of course, commodities are also set internationally pricing. Canada doesn't set the oil price, doesn't set the gold price, the uranium price, the nickel, the copper, et cetera, et cetera. So we become a little more sensitive to looking globally at those things. And that's certainly what I've been doing since the early 80s is really focusing on both global and then drilling down to domestic.
Yeah, I think it can be really easy to get stuck in your local bubble. Mm-hmm. So important to bring in that global perspective as well. And maybe you can mention some of the names, some of the can't miss presenters that you're going to have at the event.
Yeah, so we're bringing people based on their track record, and also integrity is important and honesty, but their track record against that backdrop. And again, with the goal of protecting people in this environment. I mean, one of the things I always say, Charlotte, is, and seriously, if people think the government is going to bail them out, their fingerprints are all over the housing crisis, the lack of affordable rents, increase in food costs, gasoline costs, shelter costs, broadly speaking, government isn't going to bail you out. So you're on your own, and I really think that's an important point to understand for individuals. If they think, oh, I don't care who's in government, they're going to protect me. Well, they haven't. Look at healthcare. That's their purview. Oh my gosh, it's a disaster. Got a report this week that over 17,000 people died in the last fiscal year waiting for treatment. So those are the people who are not going to protect you. So that's what we try and do. So we bring in people like my old friend Martin Armstrong, who the Wall Street Journal called the highest paid financial advisor in the world. But Marty is controversial, to say the least, because he takes on the prevailing narratives. But his track record is undeniable. I'm really looking forward to hearing Tony Greer from the Morning Navigator, TG Macro. First of all, I love his work, but it's a wonderful combination of 25 years as a trader and 15 years as sort of a newsletter analyst, called on by many, many people. His sense of the market, his feel for the market. And again, our audience really benefited from him because he literally called, if you remember, go back to November 23. And it was really negative out there. We thought, Tony sits there and says, this is a 3 sigma day. Get the truck, load it up, stocks are going higher. He also is the one who called what he called the great rotation out of commodities, first into commodities, out of tech, and then back out again. So I'm really looking forward to him. James Thorne, he's been with us several years. He's Wellington Altus Wealth Management. Last year, he sits there and literally pounds the table. He says, what's it going to take for you guys to get into the U.S.? You've got to be done with Canada as an investor. You've got to get in the U.S. You've got to get in gold. You've got to get in Bitcoin. Everything in that, it sure turned out. And as I say, that's the bottom line. How does it turn out? How did you do in the end? In the, February 2020 conference, we talked and continue to do about uranium. Peter Grandich, who's coming back, his last live performance in Vancouver, he'll be back. And I joking with him, I said, you're a hard act to follow yourself, because the last time you were here, you told us to buy Cameco, $19, $70 now, but I'm personally still very bullish on uranium, long-term investor. So as I say, that list keeps going. Lance Armstrong's coming up from Houston, Texas to chat with us. And again, Lance has had his finger on the pulse of what's going on in the States. The interest rate scenario. He's one of the few people who said interest rates are not going to drop the way you hoped. He said that a year ago. Well, they haven't and they won't. At this point, it looks pretty clear. We'll talk oil with Joseph Schachter. And again, oil is one of our sort of little basket of, you have that fundamental basket that, the thing that you don't trade, that you always is your stability. Well, oil's in ours. And I liked oil, by the way, when we saw it the other day over at $80 again, but it's a longer term hold. So yeah, it's quite an array of top-notch speakers coming from all over to speak. And it's a rare opportunity for people. They're chosen for their track record. Oh, one final thing, because I can't let these guys. We've been doing something called a World Outlook small cap portfolio. We've been doing it, I think we're in our 13th or 14th year. We've been doing it with 2 young men who I met years ago, and I interviewed them. We chatted on. And what I liked is that they were using the same methodology I would for choosing a smaller company. And their track record has been brilliant. So we put together with them a portfolio every year. Never done less than double digits. Now, you can't promise to keep doing it, but 14 years in a row. And some of these, and we've had years where that portfolio return like 70, 80%. And that's what their expertise is. We also don't only talk about those sort of smaller growth stocks. We talk about dividend payers and all of that. But yeah, that's been a huge part, is come to the Outlook, get the World Outlook Conference small cap portfolio. And people have loved it.
Yeah. Okay. It's so hard when there's a long list of people to mention them all, but we'll add the link so people can check out the full agenda in the description of the video. So we'll have that there. And I think it's so important to focus on track record. Very interesting there. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the small cap angle, because I think our audience is quite interested in these smaller companies. And of course, we've got there the high risk and the high reward typically is how that is. And I think it's interesting to put that next to the protection element that you have with gold and all those kinds of
Yes.
topics. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about how that all plays out potentially in a portfolio.
Well, we'll also have BT Global's Paul Beatty out with us. And I say that because last year he talked actually for 2 years, he's been talking about a company I wasn't originally familiar with unless Paul told me. It's Kits Eye Care, eyewear. Well, yeah, I like stuff that goes up 50%. I don't have to be an expert to go, yeah, 50, 60% gain is okay. He's going to talk more about that and he still loves it. So that's an example. Small cap's interesting because they haven't been discovered by the mutual fund group or the pension fund group. So if you can identify those just before, again, they gain that notoriety. And yes, Paul's done a great job with that. Ryan Irvine at Keystone, Aaron Dunn at Keystone. Yeah, that's why we feature them. And there's been so many examples of that literally have been, frightening in the way they've gone up. And again, you sound like, well, I don't want to promote that. I mean, we'll have to see. But if you're good at it, you do recognize value. You recognize that that's not the value that they'll get when they get rediscovered or when they get discovered in the broader market by a pension fund. Those PE ratios are going to go up and the price is going to go up with them. So, yeah, we've got a long track record of that. But your point also is it's not the same part of your portfolio as I would put gold, uranium, silver, other commodities I'd look at. I mean, I'm not there in the timing with the commodities because to me it's part of the US dollar story. But with those other ones, gold, uranium, and silver, we've got as a core position in the portfolio. The other part is offsetting that we can be a little more active, a little more aggressive. So that's how the two come together. And we feature both, of course, at the conference.
Yeah, I think it's good to have those two halves. And the way you explain it definitely makes sense, I think. So I definitely want to take a look over at gold. It's one of our big focuses here on the channel. And I know now a big focus for you as well. Mm-hmm. So curious to hear about your outlook for gold. I know you've been following it for quite some time, as you're telling me before we turned the camera on, and bullish moving forward. So drivers for gold that you're watching, outlook, what are your thoughts?
Our biggest concept or context for all investing is declining confidence in government. Now, I'll relate that back to gold in a second, but people have to appreciate if I ask them, gee, do you have more confidence in the healthcare system's going to see you on time or less? They'll go less. Do you have more confidence that in our academic institutions, they're providing a balanced view or an objective view? I think most Canadians say no, they're worried it's a partisan view. Everywhere you look and you look at government institutions, that you've seen a declining confidence. That, by the way, politically is what I see as the dominant theme that served us very well. I think Money Talks was the only place you heard people say in 2016 Trump would be elected. Literally the same week that Time magazine had him on the cover, like the end of Trump or something, in October of 2016, we said he'll win. We said Brexit would go through. It wasn't about the individual. It's about the establishment. And what I think is more recognizable, that we've seen a growing dissatisfaction, whether it's mainstream media. I mean, I'm not saying that's what an individual's view should be. They should understand that's what the general public's view is. And we've seen it manifest in so many places, including the currency. That when you start losing confidence in the currency, there's a lot of ramifications for that. I'll give you another example. Let's say your employer came in and said, you know how we're paying you $5,000 a month in Canadian dollars? Well, we're still going to pay you $5,000, but it's going to be Zimbabwe dollars. You don't have to be a currency expert to know you want no part of that. You wouldn't have confidence. Or Turkish lira or Argentinian peso, even though it's improving with Milei, President Milei, but Argentinian peso. I mean, the list is just a long one. So currencies, in my opinion, and this is where I fully appreciate you've got people who are keen on gold who have a different view. They think inflation's driving it. No, I think inflation is a reflection of lack of confidence. And if you want a big move, I mean, can you imagine the charts would look like if you put up the price of gold, but denominated in other currencies, denominated, and it's certainly come into the Western world, but let's do it denominated in Brazilian real. It's going to look like a spike. Argentina, Guatemala, the list is really a long one. Yeah, it's a currency deal. Not all of them have the same inflation profile, but they all have a lack of confidence in government's currency. So they go, I don't trust my currency. But I don't want to make it sound complicated. It's not. People do this all the time. In the 80s, before you were born and when I was already about 70. No, but in the 80s, what people used to do is they used to go out and buy like a house because they were worried it would be more expensive soon. Like, I don't want to wait 3 months. I don't want to wait a year. That's confidence in the currency. What they're really saying is the currency is not going to buy as much. And that's, to me, again, people can yes or no, but that's the key dynamic. And again, something we'll talk about at the World Outlook Conference. I think I can make a hell of a case for that, but we're seeing it everywhere. And I think that's going to ultimately propel gold. Here, my thing is this. So when does gold explode like a rocket ship? I think you can make the case it's done pretty darn well so far. And we've been recommending gold since 2014, very clearly buy on every dip. Don't worry about it. It ain't going way down because we measure it in these weakening dollars. So it's not going way down. It just has reactions. So every reaction, we've been very clear, buy it, and so the key for me for gold going forward will be when confidence leaves the US dollar, it'll be the last one standing. We've already seen it erode in the yen. We've seen it erode in the euro. As I say, and these are the Western ones. We've seen it erode in the UK, which is a mess, and the Canadian. So you've got your gold move, but you also got your move in the currency. When confidence leaves the US dollar, it'll be a rocket ship. I hate using emotive terms like that. That's the move, though. And do you want the time it's going to do that? I could give you that. 15 minutes past 3 in 2018. You'll see it more clearly. You've seen it now. Anybody awake to that goes, yeah, look at that. The paper currencies are all declining when it comes to measured against commodities. And that's the ultimate purchasing power, because your barrel of oil is the same in Cairo, as it is in China, as it is in southern US. So it's a good measuring stick as commodities that way.
Yeah. I think a lot of what you're saying will resonate with viewers, especially, when you're talking about people mentioning their purchasing power is declining and they don't necessarily know how that translates. This does make it very simple to understand and the connection to gold as well. I want to look at energy as well, because I know that you've got on the roster for the event quite a number of oil and gas companies, other types of energy companies. So I want to talk about your outlook there as well. We have a lot of people who are very interested in uranium. What are your thoughts on the outlook for those sectors?
Again, one looks short term or as an investor, a little longer time frame. So I'm talking as an investor. I just did a show on oil and gas. It's had a really difficult couple of years. And I'll start with this. If you can find some companies that did not suffer unduly, like could survive that, man, are they ever set up for a push? We're also finally acknowledging that if you are concerned about climate change and emissions, I love uranium, but it's long term. Natural gas is let's turn it on tomorrow morning, and coal, the farce as you look over in Europe, I mean, unfortunately, it's a tragic farce. But, here's Germany shutting down their 2 major nuclear plants with no backup. They had no plan. I mean, they literally had no plan. Well, what are we going to do without that power? So they're the biggest importer of coal, in Europe. Of course, emissions are huge. I mean, it's been a farce around the world. But natural gas now is finally perceived to be one of the solutions. They're not going to have to fight. Climate change activists who fight natural gas are going to look really bad. And they're still out there, believe me. But you know what? The public is starting to understand this. So after 2 really brutal years, I think natural gas gets very interesting. And as I say, especially those companies that survived, and I'm not going to say thrive, but did okay, in the last 2 abysmal years. So I kind of like, as an investor, natural gas going a bit forward here for that. Uranium, still keen long-term, because that's the ultimate solution. If we are committed to the reduction of emissions, besides other efficiencies. But then you have to add in things like, you've got, for both natural gas and for uranium, you've got this explosion in artificial intelligence. And you've watched major firms, it doesn't matter if it's Meta or Amazon, go out and try and secure their own power sources, including in natural gas. They'll be looking at nuclear that way. I think that's another huge boost. I'm looking at Japan trying to redo its nuclear again. And, publicly saying that. That's what our goal is. The real interesting time was when Europe finally turns back. France is starting to, because they were the most powered by nuclear. They're starting to talk about it because it's not doable in fossil fuels for emissions and cost and reliance on Russia. All of those things come into play here. So yeah, it's I'm long term bullish on both. Short term, natural gas is interesting. Really, I mean, there's some stuff that really hit the bottom. For those people, some people are momentum buyers. As things go up, they start. Other people are, I like to buy low, sell high. Well, you got to look at natural gas on the buy low side right now. And look at quality; it's on sale.
Yeah, yeah. And I grouped oil, natural gas, uranium kind of all together when they're very different. But as you can see, when you're talking through it, they're all part of the same energy equation. So thank you for going through that.
One
And
thing that's
I want,
sorry,
yeah,
one thing that's interesting is Canadian producers with the Canadian dollar. At a 69-cent dollar, their production costs in Canada, I'm saying, versus the United States become even more attractive, within that. And I'm thinking of oil in that way. And I'm thinking of cash flow. When you get $80 oil like we did, hit it on Wednesday, $80 oil, but we've been, up in that region. Boy, the cash flow of some Canadian producers gets incredibly attractive. And I'll tell you what I've done. I mean, I've been looking at some Canadian producers. So I'm starting with that. I want them to have cash flow. I want them to benefit this way. Their share prices have taken a huge beating. Well, they're sure a heck of a lot better buy than they were a while ago. And I would still say the world isn't even close to getting off of oil or fossil fuels. Look at Germany. I mentioned a few moments ago. Literally, the share of fossil fuels driving their electrical grid and their power grid hasn't changed a bit since 2010. Same share, despite 500 billion euros spent. I mean, they're not going anywhere. And demand out of the third world or the developing nations, they're not waiting. India is not waiting and saying, gee, I think I'll, so I can satisfy Barack Obama, I think I'm not going to develop, because the only way that you raise the standard of living is it will accompany more energy use. So yeah, so you can tell I'm bullish on all those things.
yeah, yeah. I think that gives a pretty good idea of what you're thinking there. And, just because you mentioned Canada, I know that we've been talking about how important it is to have the world outlook, but we have a pretty interesting time coming up in Canada. I think we've had Justin Trudeau just resign. We're looking for a new prime minister, probably heading sooner than later toward an election in the country. Any considerations with all of that in mind for investors?
Well, a couple of things. One is I don't knock people for having different political views. That's legitimate. My complaint about our political milieu is there's so much dishonesty with it. Why not just tell the truth? So the agenda the Liberal Party have had an agenda that has prioritized climate change. I'd say LGBTQ, some other issues around that. But their number one priority clearly has been climate change. Now we're thinking, or they're talking about Mark Carney. Well, Mark Carney is a founding member of the foundational trustees for the World Economic Conference. Their agenda is well spelt out. It's net zero. I'm not knocking. I mean, we can debate that later, but let's at least know what our choices are going to be. And they're going to continue to be anti-fossil fuel. I mean, there's just no doubt of that. He advised Prime Minister, they both said it. He advised Prime Minister Trudeau on the economic side of the climate agenda. So that's going to be, I think, one of the major issues in this debate is where do we go with our natural resources? Where do we go, especially with oil and gas? And the NDP Liberals have staked out their claim to being discouraging it. And the Conservatives said, we want more of it. So that's going to be the choice. And people can make that choice, whichever way they see, but there are consequences to both. We have dire financial situation right now when you look at the rising deficit and debt. And I'm not an alarmist about it. I'm saying there's consequences. One being you're going to pay $54 million in interest coming up next year. That's a consequence of rising that debt. That's about 11% of all government revenues, federal revenues. Well, do you want to spend it on that or something else? Well, I don't believe. Now, again, let's bring someone on who would have supported that approach from the Liberal Party and the NDP. But I personally don't think we could afford the way we sent away so much capital investment in this country, so much innovation in that area. I'm glad we got Kinder Morgan, and looking at what President-elect Trump is saying about tariffs, we should be really glad we've got the Kinder Morgan pipeline to give us access to other markets. But yeah, it'll be a very clear choice about oil, gas, other resources, uranium included. And I also think by the way, they're a very powerful chip in the way of rare earth minerals in the negotiations with President Trump or his administration. That's a very big positive for us, saying, well, don't do that because we'll give you all these rare earth minerals or critical minerals. So it's going to play a big part. But I think we have two distinct visions of Canada as a resource country. Was that diplomatic enough?
I think that was actually really quite diplomatic. So thank you for that answer. Thanks for going in that direction there. I think that we've gone through a lot of what's going to be happening at the conference, a lot of the things that are on your mind. Is there anything else you would add before I let you go? Any details on the conference or anything else that you're thinking of?
There's just a couple of things that I really enjoy. I enjoy, we have a lot of people listening to Money Talks. I enjoy meeting them in person and chatting. But I'm not saying they enjoy that, but I am saying they enjoy getting a chance to talk to someone like Peter Grandage. They get a chance to, in person, to have a chat with Tony Greer, to have a chat with James Thorne, Lance Roberts, and the list of speakers that we have. And they love that. Literally just go and, these people, if they charge for, some sort of one-on-one, would be about 50 times more than the cost of a ticket, So it's a great chance to sit, mingle. It's a day, it's Friday evening, all day Saturday, to learn many more practical things, to talk with professionals. You can get your own questions answered and just to chit chat. I love that part. And I think a lot of people who attend also like that part. So, hey, what else are you going to do anyways? It's February 7th, February 8th. It's raining both days, by the way. I know in advance. Just kidding. I don't know that. But, chilly, damp day. Or come on to the Bay Shore, the Western Bay Shore, and chat with a lot of nice people.
Yeah, I think it sounds like it's going to be a great event. And I think you can probably say that it's going to be raining pretty easily. I think Vancouver can almost guarantee that for you. So really good. We'll have all the information, like I said, in the video description below. Thank you so much for giving us a little preview and coming on to talk about your thoughts on what's going on in the resource sector and more.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you.
Of course. And once again, I'm Charlotte McLeod with investingnews.com, and this is Mike Campbell.
Thank you for watching. If you like this video, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We'd also love to hear your thoughts, so leave us a comment below.